Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next session where we will walk you through the new 6.11 release. My name is Shilan, and today I'm joined by Ruben and Chris. And before we start, let me briefly introduce them. So, Chris is a consultant at Relatics, and he's been working at the company for more than 17 years. And then we have Ruben, also a consultant, and he's been with Relatics for more than 6 years. And today, they will talk you through the newest improvements and updates of the Relatics 6.11 release. They will talk you through what has changed, why that matters, and how these new improvements will help you work more efficiently in Relatics. So today we'll cover several topics. Some of them will be focused on data and modeling, data structure and modeling. Some of them will focus on integrations and reporting, and then we have some updates regarding user management, and we have some very important, few smaller but important releases at the end. So I would say let's dive in and start with the first topic. That's around element-focused use cases. Chris, could you please tell us more?
Yes, I'm happy to do that, and I can best explain that to you by looking at an example. I don't see anything yet on the screen. Yes, perfect, thank you. Now, I have here an example workspace that I will open, where I have prepared an example. And let's first go to requirements, and this is an example workspace, and let's go to the first use case, which is called analysis. Now, users can use this in this example to view all its properties and perform a requirement analysis and complete the data. And imagine that in this process, the stakeholders are very important, and that this requirement analysis needs to be performed per stakeholder. Now, before I'm going to demonstrate the new feature, in the existing situation, what a user could have done is apply a filter. So a user could have already applied a filter, and let's, for example, select one and select this one. Now, although this works very well, there are a couple of challenges in this case. So the first challenge here is that it's not always immediately clear that what the process is. That in this case, it's very important to work and go through each of the stakeholders and complete the requirement analysis. And what we sometimes see is that power users are then inclined to develop multiple use cases at the top, but this can also become very overwhelming, or in some cases, this is not even possible. Now, the second challenge here is that if you look at a requirement, now we only see one stakeholder, one for each requirement, and that's logical because we have applied a filter. But when I would now remove this filter, you would see that in some cases, a requirement can actually be related to multiple, like 2 stakeholders in this case, or 3 stakeholders. Now, to deal with these challenges, our development team has created something which is called element-focused use cases. Now, let me show you how it works. And for that, I will go here to the menu on a use case, and I will go to Settings. Then I will click on Advanced, and now I can enable element focus. Now, the last step is that I can also select a relation. In this case, we're working with stakeholders, so let me select the stakeholder and hit the Update button. And now, what we now see is at the top left an option for a user, where a user needs to select, in this case, a stakeholder before we see data. So let's click on one, and let's use the same example. And now we see again the data. Now, what is important here is that it looks like a filter, but actually it's not. And similar to subset of elements, a user gets the full collection of data within, in this case, for a stakeholder, and a user can also click on another stakeholder to see other data. But it's important that the user sees the full the full data set. And the most important thing is that the user is really guided. So from the beginning, it's clear that the use case should be used to go through the process, and in this case, that for each of the stakeholders, the requirement analysis is performed. Now, the second thing you'll notice is that a requirement can here be linked to multiple stakeholders. So you get the full context. Now, the third advantage here is that the value that has been selected by the user, or the focus that has been applied to the user, is always remembered. So if a user comes back the same day, the next week, always this value is remembered so that the user can continue working.
All right, thank you, Chris. Well, I must say this looks like a pretty easy example. Can you tell us what else it can be applied to in practice?
Yes, of course. I've also prepared another use case, so this is maybe a relatively simple example. What we see is that Relatics in practice is used a lot for compliance purposes. And so think about verifications, reviews, tests. Now, if we now go to verifications, we again see first the element, in this case it's the my view. There's here a verification plan we see often. Again, these are examples where verifications in this case are prepared. And then we see the verification result, where actually the result of the verifications are worked on by the users. Now, in some cases, what is challenging is that in this case we have verifications. In this example model, it's linked to objects. Objects are linked to activities, activities to work packages. And in the process, it's really helpful if you can narrow down all the results to the different work packages. In other words, the focus should be on the work packages. If you would apply a filter, it could be relatively difficult maybe for a user to find it. Or if you would want to work on the detailed view of a work package, a power user can create a use case, but you can then not edit that. Now again, the element focus here is very helpful in this. So let me again show this one. I will go a little bit faster, but let's go to settings, advanced, apply the element focus. And now we can see that we can follow the model. So we are at verifications. We first open object, we move a little bit down to activities, and now we go to work package, and then hit update. And if I now apply the element focus, again, we can now see all, in this case, verifications, but now for work package, and you can see that also for second, third, or nth order relations, we are still able to narrow down and focus on the results a user needs.
Right, thank you, Chris. That's a great addition. So let's move on to the next topic, option and option sets. Ruben, could you tell us more?
Yeah, so we already had properties with data type lists. So these properties were, of course, used for things like a status property for a requirement, which is a short list of set values. But we actually added an improvement to the existing property. So I'll dive into Relatics and show you what I'm talking about. I'll head over to another example project. So we'll take this Watergate Bridge project, and let's dive into my graph view. And what I want to do is I want to illustrate our improvements via an example. So let's take the element person and create a new property called nationality. It's not really a systems engineering example, but it's to show you what these improvements are. And immediately we can see it's a bit different than the existing list property. And this property, this option property, is used for one single value per element. But what I want to do is I want to show you our first improvement. So I'll head back to my desktop and I'll open another file, because we added the ability to paste or copy and paste our values from a different source, like in this case Excel. And I'll move back to my workspace, and I can simply paste all the nationalities into my property, my option property. I have the ability to apply a custom order. I can still use the colors to reference certain values, which of course I'm not going to do right now because I have over 100 values. And you can add attributes if you want to. And then that's the second improvement. So the first one was a copy and paste, but the second improvement is that we can manage much longer lists in this property. So I have over 100 values, and when I hit create, we'll get that property. And if I move over to my view table and apply this property to this table, we can see that we can fill in the nationality. And here I have the ability to show you another cool feature. You are now able to search in this list, which is of course pretty handy once you have more than 100 results. So you have the ability to quickly scan your list, select your nationality, just pick a few random, instead of having to scroll down this entire list and having to find the exact value. And of course you can copy and paste this information for instances or for entire rows. And next to that, so we saw the search in the list, but what I really think is that by adding these improvements to the existing list property, which is now called option property, we've added more flexibility to your model. So you don't have to really force yourself to move over to an element with a relation as soon as you have a very long list. Now you can stay with that option property and keep it pure and simple.
Right. And then when you just created the property, I also saw below option something called option sets.
Yep.
What is that?
Yeah, so I'll show you the new property type. So this is an added property type that we didn't have in the existing version. And I want to take the same example project, but in this case, I want to expand my risk element with a cost category. And in this case, we've identified that a risk can have multiple cost categories per element. So what the option set property does is it allows you to manage a long list of options, but it also allows you to select multiple values per element. So let's see how that works. I'll open the settings for risks. I'll create a new property called cost category. And I'll select my data type, which is option set. So this is the new data type for this property. And again, you'll see this availability for options. So I'll use the same improvement that I did for the option property. I'll get my list, or I copy my list from another source and simply paste it into my property to immediately have that list available. And you can spot another improvement because we had a maximum of 50 characters per value. We've actually upped that limit to 100 characters per value, so you can manage longer values. And this goes for this applies for the option property, but this also applies for the option set property. Once I hit create, let's head over to my risk overview, go to the My View table, and select my new cost category property, and I'm able to select multiple values for my risk element, which is of course possible to copy it over onto additional risks, but again you can use the search function to quickly find your value, and I think it's also valuable to look at the filter because you now have the ability to filter on those multiple values in your list, just to get a zoom in on those risks with multiple options filled in. So the option and the option set have gotten a few big improvements, and I think this is really something that enables you to have a lot more flexibility in your model.
Yeah. So, well, now we have an idea of how that works, how it looks like. Can you also share with us that, you know, as a consultant, out of your experience, what are some use cases you could apply this to?
Yeah, so as a consultant, I often see clients thinking about how to apply their processes onto a systems engineering model in the project. And I really think that by adding the option set property and by improving the existing list property, which is now called option, we're really trying to bridge that gap between having a small property with a set list over to an element with a relation. So we had examples of projects where they were forced to choose an element with a relation based on functionality because the list property was not really fulfilling those needs. And I think that by adding the option and option set properties, we've added a lot more flexibility to the model, but we've really bridged that gap between properties and your actual elements with the relations if you want to manage dynamic lists. On top of that, because the option and option set are properties, you have the ability to make them a part of your model so that when you use the template feature, you are able to update existing projects with the list of option and option set without having to immediately go over to elements or relations.
Okay, thanks. And was this all for this part?
Well, no, I actually have another feature that I'd like to show because I was talking about templates or templating, and I want to get everyone up to speed. So I know that not everyone is diligently watching our webinars. So for the people that aren't watching our webinars, a quick introduction for templates. We have the template feature in Relatics, which allows you to create a certain systems engineering model, which is based on lessons learned from projects of a similar type, let's say construction projects of a similar type. And by expanding that model in your development workspace, you are able to then create a new template version, which you can then update over projects that are attached to this template. So as I was speaking before, the option and option set property are part of your model. There are set lists that are in your model, and they'll be applied with template updates. But what if you have an element with a relation and you want to use the data from that element in your template as well? That is why the feature for Quickstart reference data has been introduced in this version. So it's not only for properties that are part of the model, but you can actually identify certain elements to be part of your template version. So I'm going to head over to a development workspace that I already prepared for this event. So we have a development workspace in which we are managing a systems engineering model for projects of a similar type. And by adding an element, let's put it a bit differently. This model has matured to a level that we want to take the cost categories for risks and elevate them from a property to an element. Now, I do need to say that the Quickstart feature is focused on reference elements, and to explain reference elements to everyone, these are typically elements that are unique, but that you want to reuse across multiple projects. They tend to have a longer life cycle than a project, and examples include object types, locations, or even persons. In this case, we created the reference element for cost category because this model has matured to a level that we now want to manage a network of relations surrounding the cost category. As we can see, the cost category is being used by both risk and work package. And we want to have the ability to manage a dynamic list so that users can add or create or modify existing elements. Now, the Quickstart data feature allows you to go to a reference element. And as you can see, we already have a list of available categories. Let's add a new category to that. I'm not very creative, so I'll take new cost category. I'll go into the settings of my reference element, and we've added this tab for template. Once you move over to template, you can enable the option to provide existing elements as Quickstart data. So once you're satisfied with the new maturity level of this model, there's been some additions like relations element, or in this case, the addition of cost category as Quickstart. Then you head over to your templates. And from this development workspace, we create a new template version. In this version, you'll get a change log, so what has been changed since the last version. You can add a description or a name if you want to. Once you hit create, this version becomes available to any project that is attached to this template. And once we have that new version, I go back to my environment, and let's say for this example that I'm starting a new project of a similar type. So let's do that. I'll head over to my workspace list, create a new project workspace, call that project of a similar type. Again, I'm not very creative. And then we can hit the template subscription setup, which allows me to use a template that's been published internally. And here I can find my version that I just created, then hit create. And now a new project is made that carries over the model that it receives from the development workspace. Of course, I have to give myself access. So let's quickly do that. Make myself power user, of course. Head over to my project workspaces. Where's my, hey. Have to go to my new project workspace. There it is. Oh, wait. This is we're actually on the laptop of my colleague Chris. So I'm adding the wrong person. Make Chris power user as well. Go to projects of a similar type. Move over to the graph view. And now we can see the same model that it's present in your template workspace. And once I enable reference elements, I can see that the cost category has been added. You can actually see a small icon right here indicating that this element is now part of Quickstart data. And once I head over to my view, I can nicely see that every element from that list has been added as Quickstart data to my project.
All right, thank you, Ruben. Another great addition as well, I think. I would say let's move on to the next topic, which is formula improvements. Chris, please tell us more.
Yes. Now, as you might already know, formulas in Relatics can be stored in properties, and these can be used for calculations. And our development team has now upgraded the way how we can work with formulas. Now, let me go back to the example workspace, which is this one, and let us now first focus on the model. So if I click on this button, I can open the type graph view, and let's focus on the risks, where I have prepared an example. Let's also view everything, the reference elements from the model. Now, in this example workspace, users can manage risks, and they identify risks, and they can store that. And when we look at this relation can be used to look at the probability. What is the probability of the risk occurring by selecting a likelihood? And users can use this relation to select the impact, to quantify the magnitude of when the risk would occur. Now, as you might already know, we can already have calculated properties to calculate with a formula, for example, a score. But up till now, we could only do that with properties. So when a risk would have some properties, we could use them in a calculation, but not yet any related elements. But using related elements can be very helpful, for example, when you have different set of lists that users need to be able to select from per workspace. So if you don't want it to be included in the template, this could be a solution for that. Now let's look at how this works. I will click on risk, and I will now click on new type property here in the toolbox. And now I will fill in the name score. Now let's go for a number, because in the end we want to have a number to be calculated. The precision 0 is just fine. We don't need any more digits. For configuration, obviously we need calculated, as we're using a formula. Now I have prepared a little formula that I need to copy and paste, which is this one. And if you now pay a close attention to the formula, then you will see that we can now follow the path towards one of the relations, likelihood, and take the value of its property. And in this case, we're simply multiplying this to the relation of the impact, and again, its value. This is a very basic formula, but we, in risk management, we see a little bit more complicated formulas. Now, if we now hit the create button, we'll see that in the model right here, the score has been added. So this is what I've done as a power user. So now let's move on to the user. For that, I will close the type graph view and will now head over to the risks. Now, I've prepared here a use case, and you can already see some risks and a likelihood and impacts that have been selected according with their values, like 2 and 4. In the end, we want this to be calculated as 8. Now, let's open the model selector over here. Let's hit the score, and now we see on the right-hand side in the last column the score calculated. Now, normally what users, of course, do, for example, they click here on the likelihood and then use here create relation. For example, they could select number 3 for possible, and let's do the same impact, but now I use the double click, and let's hit select 5 and hit the apply button. And 3 times 5 results into 15. Also, what users often do is they use the sorting, which we could already do. So first ascending, then descending, and ranking them risks can really help them to prioritize risks, to look at which risks to mitigate first. But the most important thing to take out of this is that instead of using only properties, we are now also able to use related elements and their properties in the calculations.
Right, thank you. So thank you for taking us through this improvement, one of the improvements we've done, which I think is very useful. Chris, let's move on to the next topic, single inner derived. Please take it away.
Yes, also for this, I will first head into the type graph view, give a little bit of context, and then show you what the new feature is. So if you look at the model, there are a couple of inner derived type elements. a mouthful, but an example here is a risk that has a cause and effect, or a stakeholder with a node. Now, they are visualized as that you can see that it's a child of its parent, and the way how it's visualized, and because of the dotted borderline, we can see that it is an inner derived element. Inner derived type elements are really in supporting their, in this case, another element, in this case, a stakeholder. Now, what we are focusing on now are single inner derived type elements. It's best to just create one so that you can see what happens. Now, for stakeholder, let's create a new inner derived type element. For that, here we can simply, as a power user, click on new derived type element. I've prepared one called analysis. So we have to fill in the name, the plural, and find a nice icon. And then as a short name, let's do this one. Now, so far, this is a derived type element. By enabling this, it becomes an inner type element. Now, so far, so good. This was already possible. The new feature that we're talking about has everything to do with this setting. Now, currently, we see that it's set as multiple, which is the default. And for nodes, that happens to be the case. So for the stakeholder in the model, it has been decided that there are multiple nodes. Now, then we have multiple. But now we have here two different flavors, which is maximum one and exactly one. Now, let's imagine that in the process, we want that every stakeholder needs to be analyzed, and also that there can only be maximum one analysis, because we don't want the results to be ambiguous, there just needs to be one clear result. So in this case, I'm going to choose exactly one. Now, let's hit the Create button, and also to have the feature, which I'll show in a minute, to have it a little bit, make it a little bit better, I will add a couple of properties. So let's give this, for example, influence that I often see. I will not spend too much time on the data types, so I will call this interest. And let's do another one, remark, like this. Now, we can already see here in the model the 1 over here, so we know it can be maximum 1. But now let's look at what it looks like for the user. Now, for that, I will go to the stakeholders on the left-hand side, and we'll now go to the detail view by clicking on one of the IDs, and go to the table. Now, for the nodes, which was already there, it's a multiple, so we see multiple rows, one for each element, and the columns going from left to right. But we can notice two things about the analysis. One, the table is visually transposed. In other words, the properties are shown from top to bottom. And two, the element was already created for us. So we don't need to create the analysis because it always has to be there. So we can right away start and fill in some data. Now, this, one of the benefits, obviously, is that it's an efficient use of the space. You can imagine that if you have a lot of properties in a table, so if you look at nodes and your screen is not that wide, it could maybe fall a little bit off your screen. So especially for the single inner derived type elements, this is an optimal way of presenting the data. Now, let's also look at the last example, and then we've seen all the flavors. For that, again, I will go a little bit faster, but I will click on stakeholder and click on new derived type element. Now, let's this time go for an address. The plural would be addresses. And let's also find, again, a nice icon. We need to have the short name, which is used usually in the ID, prefix of the ID. Again, inner derived element, so let's enable it. And in this case, I will go for a maximum one. So imagine in the process that maybe not every stakeholder needs to have an address, maybe only the ones which are in close proximity of the project need an address in this example. So I'll go for maximum one. Let's hit the create button, and let's also do a couple of obvious properties. So we'll go for a street, we'll go for a postal code, and let's finally also go for a city. Again, a relatively basic example. All right. And now let's look at what happens now for the user. So I'm finished as a power user. This only needs to be done once by the power user. And now let's go back to our example we've been using so far. We see the nodes, which is maximum, analysis, which is in exactly one, and addresses is now the maximum one. Now, the first thing you'll see here is that it's showed quite condensed, because you don't want the page to be filled with a lot of empty tables. It's optional. But as a user, we can now simply click on this icon on the right-hand side, hit the plus button, and now we are able to enter the data. Of course, this is just an example, but now we see all the flavors that behave in different settings, in different ways depending on the setting.
Thanks, Chris. So I think this feature definitely helps to users to see their properties in a more intuitive way. That brings us to the next topic, spreadsheets reports. Ruben, please tell us more.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll take over the laptop from my colleague Chris. Imagine that you are managing your risks in Relatics, which of course people so often do, and you are managing this information, but you need a way to export this information to outside of Relatics, maybe to management for analysis or something like that. And we already had the ability to publish this information to Microsoft Excel. I'll just close my full screen. But this is an exact representation of the table that you see in Relatics. So you don't have the ability to apply any extensive formulas or any visual representation of the data or any data analysis and so on. This is just an exact copy of the table that is present in Relatics. Now, we can very well imagine that people are actually using their Excel expertise to create extensive spreadsheets that apply all the powers and all the strengths that Excel has to offer, like interconnected formulas or pivot tables or any kind of graph or pie charts and the like. Now, we already had the ability to use reporting in the form of PDF and Word, but as you can imagine, once you have a large table, like something like a risk register or maybe a verification plan or even result, it's hard to really put that into a Word or PDF file. So what we did is we added the ability to create spreadsheet reports as a native feature in Relatics. Now, I want to show you how this works, so I'll head over back to an example. So let's say somebody took a lot of expertise, a lot of time to create an Excel file with all the strengths that Excel offers. So we have, and of course this is an example, so it can even be more complex than we have right here, but let's say we have a risk register with all the information that is relevant to the risks. We have formulas to calculate different scores. We have formulas that are interconnected to calculate even more about maybe impact or things like that. And we have a dashboard, which I'll just give space, enabling us to create pie charts, pivot tables, graphs, really anything you would use for trend analysis or data analysis of your risks. But the problem is that this Excel file has been created manually by someone, and they have to fill it manually with the data. Now, how awesome would this be if we could use this template and then fill it with the Relatics data and have the dashboard use all that information in its calculation. So this is a filled example. Let's take an empty example. I'll just close this down. Right here, so it's the same table, same columns, same risk register, same dashboard, but right now it's empty because it doesn't have any data. Let's move over back to Relatics, and we have our information that we want to upload into a report. And this spreadsheet report functions the same way as the existing Word or PDF reports, down to the syntax. So what you do is you create a My View or use case table containing all the information that you want to export. Then you head over to the settings of the use case and go over to Copy, Script, or Query. Copy that information for a spreadsheet report, and I'll move over to my empty Excel file and just paste the syntax information into the file. So you don't have to write this syntax down by yourself. You can, obviously, if you're experienced in it, but you can simply create a table, and this generates the proper syntax. We don't need the columns anymore because we already have that in our Excel template. And once we're satisfied with the result, we'll save the file, head over to Relatics, and we'll move over to the Output tab right here, where we can go into Reports, and let's create a new report, and we can select Spreadsheet Report. Of course, we have to give it a name. Let's call it Risk Register, and now we can upload the template that we already have, this one. I still have to close it down, my apologies. Select this one. Upload the file, again. Hit a subject, which is the main element of your report, and then we can hit Create. Ooh. I have, let's see if I can quickly fix this out. Let's see, I have my risk here and my risk there. It's not really blank. Well, let's try that one again. So we'll go back into Relatics. Let's take the field report. Just delete the data.
Control-Alt.
Yeah, but this is about the syntax. Copy that information again. Delete the information. Double check my dashboard, which should Control F5 be empty. Let's try this version. And go into my report, create a new one. Call it Risk Register. Upload the file. And hopefully I fixed the issue for me. Is it? I'm terribly sorry.
We'll come back to
We
that
are
later.
experiencing, yeah, we'll come back to that later, I'm sorry. So we'll move over to the next topic then, I guess.
Of course, it
Sorry.
wouldn't be a live demo if something didn't go wrong. So let's move on to the next topic then. That's about data warehousing and BI. Chris,
Yes.
please.
Well, more and more organizations invest in data warehouses and business intelligence applications, or BI applications. And we see that more and more sources are available with information. So in data warehouses, information is pulled in from a planning system or a BIM application, and also Relatics. Now, if we look at Relatics, and let's go back, is that every project has its own workspace. And the challenge up till today has been, how can I get all the information from the workspaces and combine it for analysis purposes? Now, our development team has worked on a feature, so let's look into that. Now, as a power user with sufficient roles and rights, I can, on the top left, click on Environment Administration. That was already available with the right roles and rights. But what is new now is, on the left-hand side, the data warehouse interfaces. Now, when I click on that, we see here already an example. I will come back to that later. But for now, let's create a new one. So if we create a new interface, we are able to set up a new data warehouse interface that would enable a data warehouse application and also a BI application later to do a request to Relatics and receive back the data to use that in the data warehouse. Now, let's show you how it works and run through a couple of the fields. So the first one would be, in this case, I've prepared an example called maintenance projects. So let's imagine there are a lot of projects, and some of them are maintenance projects, and we want to have the data available in a data warehouse. Now, the second step is the API key on the left-hand side, where you see applications authentication. On a central place, all the API keys are managed, and that is really to, for an external application, make it safe and secure, that with a client ID, a client secret, and everything in a safe way, the data can be obtained. Now, for that, I've again created an example. The endpoint is automatically generated based on the name. Of course, you can also change that, for example, to make it really unique. And then we have here a time. Now, let's select a time. In this case, I will select 2 a.m. And this is the moment in time where all the data is fetched from the workspaces and made available for an application to be picked up. Now, in a minute, I will explain more to you how this technically works and everything you need to know about that. Status is enabled, so it's already active. Now let's hit the create button and let's go further. Now on the top left, over here, you see all the properties I've just filled in, and we also see here a URL, and that URL together with the key can be provided to the external application to be able to fetch the data. Now, a second step, and for that I will first go here to the included workspaces, would be to say, hey, out of all the workspaces, which are the workspaces that are allowed to fetch the data from? Now, in this case, I have prepared a little example, but as you can see, some are in gray and some are in black. So these are the ones I can actually select because every project workspace can only be part of one data warehouse interface. Now let's hit the update button. Now, what have we done so far? A couple of properties, give it a name and a timing. Then also say what is the scope of the project workspaces from which the data needs to be fetched. Now, the second step would be the query, because the model can be quite large, and what portion of the model do we want to make available? Now, for that, we can use, again, a script. I have prepared this script for today. It's a very simple script, really, to show you a little bit what it looks like. It looks very similar to, for example, the scripts you also use for exports that you use for XML and Excel. In this case, it fetches the risks, including the auto-generated ID, the name, and the status. Now, let's click on the update button. An important prerequisite of this, of course, is that each of these workspaces need to have a model that adheres to this query. If the model is slightly different, it would not work. But therefore, we have this button, which is called Validate Query. So if I click on that button, we can see interface is valid. So all the models match with the query. Now, as promised, I will tell a little bit more on the technical side. So here we see daily on, and that's the moment in time when the data is ready. Now, what happens at a set interval, so every day at this time, this query that you see is applied to all of these workspaces, and all the data is fetched and stored into separate files. Now, the technology that's used here is called Parquet files, and that is an open source column-oriented file that is supported by many data warehouses and applications. And that can then be used. But let's imagine that you are working on this and you're also working on the data warehouse going back and forth, then obviously you don't want to wait another day before the files are ready. So as a power user, we can always click on this button, Run Now, have the data files, these Parquet files, refreshed so they can be picked up.
Right, thank you. Well, that looks very helpful. Can you then also show us an example of the results and how that looks like in a BI application or a data warehouse?
Yes, of course. So this is the way, the situation where we set it up on the Relatics side. Now, if we go back, as promised, I've also prepared another one, which is called Major Projects. Just an example of how you could cluster certain project workspaces. I will not show all of the details, but there's a bunch of workspaces here on the left-hand side, and we have a query that's a little bit bigger. We have some risks, we have some likelihoods, impacts, incidents, requirements, and this data has been made available to a data warehouse. Now, as said, it can be used in any type of data warehouse or BI application. In this case, we have used Microsoft Fabric as an example to see what it looks like. So I'm now going to Microsoft Fabric, the Microsoft Data Warehouse, and let's go to this Lakehouse. And I won't go into every detail, but it's good to understand that the data warehouse in the process automatically picks up the data from Relatics. And for example, here on the left-hand side, you can see the various data tables. So all these Parquet files are pulled in, they are extracted into the various tables that we can see here. So for example, if I click on the requirements table, you see a column at the beginning with all kinds of IDs, workspace IDs, and at some point you will see another ID. All the data is in, and we can see here an ID and a status because, that was part of the query I've made. The same goes, for example, for risks. It's more of the same, but the columns are a little bit different according to the query. Now you can also see, and this is just an example, for example, from an ERP system like SAP or a planning system like Primavera, what we often see, data from multiple sources is pulled in and is then in a combined way presented to a BI application. Again, many BI applications you could use. I have now prepared an example with Microsoft Power BI, and let's open that one. And most of you already know how Power BI works, but just to complete the story, we now see that data is here pulled in from the data warehouse, which in turn, the data warehouse had fetched in the data from Relatics. And now we see a bunch of metrics at the top, some graphs. These are risks, for example. These are incidents. You can use your own creativity to create whatever you want. And we also see some other sources that are pulled in. And of course, you could even combine data from Relatics, maybe risks, associated costs, with costs from the SAP system or ERP to take everything together. Again, this is just an example, and the emphasis really here is on analyzing the data.
All right, thank you. I think in addition, which our users will find very useful as well. That brings us to a related topic, application integration. Could you tell us more?
Yes, absolutely. So what we've seen so far is a way how on the environment level, data can be provided to an external application. That's the feature we have just seen. Our development team has also worked on a feature to provide data on the workspace level to another application. And for that, let's go to an example. So let's open the workspace I've been opening so far. And another addition I would like to make is that so far Relatics could already receive data from another system using an interface. Think about pulling in documents from a document management system and showing it in Relatics, or pulling in locations from a geographical information system and showing it into Relatics. And we could already provide data to an external system, but that was really by means of a manually created Excel or XML file. But now we also have an interface. So let's go to the bottom left, and as a power user, I can go to settings, I can go to application interfaces, which was already there, but what we can now do is unfold, go to providing data, and we see here a list. Now, these are just some examples maybe a little bit to inspire, but for example, we could send data from requirements and locations to a geographical information system, maybe to have it visualized on a map, or send requirements and objects to a BIM application to show it in a 2D or 3D model. Let's imagine that we now want to send work packages to a planning system. Now, let's, for example, call that work packages, and we want to send that, for example, to Primavera. And API key works exactly the same. It's defined on the environment level to give access to an external application, and that can then be reused in the various project workspaces. Now, the endpoint, you can change this if you want, and we have the URL, which can be provided to the external application alongside with the keys to actually be able to fetch the data. And when we now click on Create, we see the properties I've just added here in the top left. Now, finally, what we need to do is descript, and again, this looks very similar to what we've seen before. In this example, it's all about work packages, so let's click on this button, paste in the example, and again, a very simple example. This will only provide work packages with an ID, name, and a description. Let's hit the update button. And finally, we could also click on the model view to have a little bit of a nicer view for maybe to validate it. Now, to wrap it up, we've seen the data warehouses on the environment level to provide data. This is more on the workspace level, and whereas maybe on the environment level, it's more for analysis purposes, this can be very useful for visualization purposes. Maybe you would want to visualize this in a Gantt chart, for example, in the work, in the planning software.
All right, thanks, Chris. So let's move on to the next section, which will be about some improvements we've done on user management. Ruben, please tell us more.
All right, so there have been a few major updates to user management in Relatics, and I want to start off by saying that these updates will be available for both the Relatics 5 and the Relatics 6 environment. So don't worry, it doesn't matter which version you're using, you will receive these updates. But it's quite a technical story, and I want to keep it simple, so I'm going to focus on the benefits for both the user managers and the users. Our first update, and I'll move to the settings of the environment, is that we added the ability to use multiple identity providers alongside the existing option of Microsoft Entra ID. So as long as you have an identity provider that works according to the industry standard OpenID Connect, or OIDC for short, you are able to add that identity provider to your Relatics environment and use it for single sign-on. So we have an example like Okta. We already have Microsoft Entra ID, and of course Relatics is an identity provider as well. Once I click on an identity provider, just a quick mention, we also added the ability to batch edit your users. So you are able to select multiple users and then maybe change the identity providers for those users to another identity provider, or you could maybe edit the account status to disable and enable multiple accounts at the same time. And of course, in Relatics, it's possible to use multiple identity providers alongside the others in one environment. So you can enable an identity provider based on users. For the user, the process of logging in has been made a lot simpler, because you only have to fill in your email, and then Relatics will automatically search for the correct identity provider that is attached to that email, and then, of course, you can fill in your password, and then you'll enter Relatics. Now, the second update, also in the environment, is that we added the support via SCIM, or System for Cross-Domain Identity Management. So you are now able to add actors for user administration to the settings of your environment, allowing you to select an identity provider which can synchronize its users automatically to Relatics, so that users are automatically created in Relatics, which you can fill in for the actors for user administration. And again, we can use identity providers like Microsoft Entra ID, but also Okta, or maybe even OpenConnect. This allows you to centralize your user management, and of course it makes it a lot easier and more efficient by having that automatic synchronization of users. And I think that these major updates really elevate Relatics to the next security level and centralize your user management.
Okay. All right, Ruben, thank you. And that actually brings us to the...
One more. And
yes,
again, this is for both Relatics 5 and Relatics 6 environments. So it doesn't matter if you're already working in Relatics 6 or if you're still working in Relatics 5.
Okay, good to know. So, like I said, to the last part of this 6.11 release, where we want to show you some smaller improvements our colleagues from development have been working on. So, Ruben, could you show us what those are?
Yeah, so for our next segment, we have a couple of features that we want to show you that are still very valuable for the users, but didn't have their own segment. So I'll quickly move through those new features, and I'll head over to my example workspace. So the first feature that I want to show you is that we improved the compare mode for tables. So let's take an example. Let's say, for example, that you are managing your requirements in Relatics, and you have a lot of data in your workspace. Now, the ability to, let's add some information to this. So let's say you have a My View table with some information about your requirements, and you are able to select compare mode, and this allows you to pick a moment in the past or moment since the creation of your workspace, and it allows you to track any changes. So as you can see, we have some changes here in the overview, and those changes are color-coded to make it more readable for the users. So I don't know if it's very visual in the screen, but we have yellow for modified information, red for removed information, of course green for added information, and you could also have deleted information. But we added the ability to publish this information to Excel. So instead of having to look at this information in Relatics, you can now open this information in an Excel file, and it applies the same kind of formatting that you see in the compare mode. So you'll see what's been added, what's been deleted, what's been modified, and of course then you can use this for analysis or maybe to discuss it with members of the project. I'll quickly move on to my other features. So that was the compare mode together with publish. We also added the ability to look at our overview of derived elements. And for everyone that's not familiar with the webinars, you could have a model, so I'll move back to my graph view, in which you created an element or an origin element with a derived element. For this instance, we have activities with work packages. Another example could be control measures for risks. Now you have the ability to go to the overview of said control measures, and then you can see that the control measures are part of their origin element or their group, which in this case is risk. Maybe, I don't know if the color is visible, but this is a green column for groups. Now we already had the ability to include empty groups, so you could quickly spot risks that still need a control measure, or maybe your work packages that still need an activity. But now we added the ability to focus on empty groups only. And this is of course very useful for if you're managing thousands of risks or thousands of work package activities, or maybe even thousands of verifications, because then you can focus on the empty groups, allowing you an overview of where you still need to maybe mitigate your risks or create verifications without being bothered by the filled groups. Next up, we have a feature improvement for rich text. So let's say, and I'll disable my compare mode, let's say I have a table. I'll zoom out a bit. I have a table showing me requirements. A little bit, like this. Of course, you'll use properties with a text data type, things like requirement text, or in this case, review comments, where you want to apply a large text. However, if the text was too long and you were applying things like rich text with formatting, bullet points, things like that, you can see that Relatics cuts off the content and you weren't able to read the entire contents of the table. Now we've added the ability to expand rich text by simply hovering over the cell. You have the ability to read the entire content. You can scroll in that little field and you can quickly see what's a part of this column. Nice improvement for the application of rich text onto text properties. Now the final feature is something that improves the application integration you might have with SharePoint. So in this example workspace, I have an application integration with a SharePoint environment. So what that means is that my documents, which are in my model right here, are being synchronized from SharePoint for every 15 minutes. Now what we did is we expanded the ability of this application integration by allowing you to map custom properties or custom fields from SharePoint onto new properties. So I already have some examples right here. I've added external properties for the type of a document or for the work package that's linked to that document, and I've mapped it as a custom field in my application interface. So I can see that right here for my demo. You can see that the work package is a custom field or the document type is a custom field, and you can use basically any field that SharePoint provides for your integration. And of course, I want to show you a little bit of proof. So I'll head over to one of my documents, open it up in SharePoint, and we can see that this information was already present in SharePoint, but now I've mapped it onto a custom field in Relatics.
And that brings us actually to the end of this Relatics 6.11 release. We've seen many new updates and improvements today, so thank you, Chris and Ruben, for taking us through them. Notice that as from this week, starting tomorrow, these features will be live. The release notes will cover everything, an overview of everything, so make sure to take a look. For now, thank you all for joining. We hope this release will help you get started with the 6.11 features. Know that following these sessions, there will be 2 breakout sessions. So Antea Group will host a session in Mission 1, and Van Oord will host our session in the room we're currently in. And after those sessions, we'll have a small coffee break. In case you didn't know, you can scan the back of the badge you have. There's a QR code, and you can find the full program there. Make sure also to stay for the closing keynotes. Until then, Ruben and Chris will walk around, so feel free to approach them if you have any questions or if you'd like an autograph. And for now, enjoy the rest of the program and the rest of the day. Thank you.
Yeah.